So do you ever feel like this guy and want to bury your head in the sand? I know I do. These days, thankfully, it's not so much around having courageous conversations as it is really around what's happening in the news. Hi, I'm Laura Maloney, and I work with leaders and teams who are seeking to level up their approaches, be more effective in their work, and lead in ways that may even surpass their own expectations or thinking around what is even possible. I'm also from the animal welfare sector, and I served as COO of the Humane Society of the United States and CEO of Louisiana SPCA, among others. So why the topic of courageous conversations? Especially when we're dealing with difficult conversations daily in our work. Well, in speaking with leaders in the past year, this was one of the topics that they felt needed leveled up in the field. They wanted to have and be more effective at having courageous conversations, which is interesting because we're facing conversations every day that are super, super difficult. We may be speaking to someone that is making the very difficult decision of either relinquishing their pet or letting the pet pass peacefully. We may be disagreeing with our boss or our board, or we may be approaching a challenging colleague. So today I'd like to touch upon a bit of the neuroscience behind our reactions, offer 8 steps to having a courageous conversation, and then share a worksheet that will give you some practice. And you should be able to download this on the website, and that can help you think through the conversation, kind of your points, and what you'd like to say specifically. So this, for us animal people, is probably not a great image. And for several years, I worked with the world's best big cat scientists, and I was the only one who didn't want to see a kill. I'd actually prefer a Disney-like way of viewing the world where no creature or human is ever hurt. But this does happen, unfortunately. And when we're triggered, we tend to fight or flee. It can take practice to achieve a balance and feel at ease in highly stressful moments. All of us have been there. And I'd like to give you some tools today to help reduce that fight or flight response. So before we do, I'd like you to think back to a time when you've had a conversation that you were not looking forward to. Does one come to mind for you? A super difficult conversation. So as you recount that, what do you notice about what's happening physically? What's happening in your body? Do you have a churning stomach? Does your heart beat a little faster? Do you have sweaty hands? Does just heart palpitations? Like, what is going on for you physically? What's happening to you emotionally? Are you teary? Are you angry? Do you feel sad? Do you feel frustrated? What are all those emotions that come flooding in when you think about this conversation? And what's happening to you physiologically? Do you have a racing mind? Do you feel like you're being hijacked? Do you feel something else is taking over? All of those are super common responses when we're feeling stressed or triggered. Some of you may have heard of this neurological response to stress called an amygdala hijack. And this can happen even if it's just perceived stress, not even real stress. It's not happened yet, but you're thinking about it happening. So this amygdala part of our brain is responsible for the perception of emotions such as anger and fear and sadness and aggression and all of those things. It helps store memories or events, of events and emotions so that an individual can help recognize similar events in the future. It actually has a great purpose. And if you think back, decades, or not even decades, thousands of years ago, it served a really good purpose. If you're being faced with a dangerous situation, that flooding of emotion can help you not get into the same situation and again, or just be aware of it. So when we encounter a situation that's similar in our current life, we can be triggered and our ability to override that emotion is compromised. And so this amygdala hijack, which is what we think of it as, is losing control of our emotions. And, think about when a time when you're talking to, it could be your spouse, your partner, your family, your colleague, your boss, and they don't appear to be listening to you, or they're ignoring what you're saying, or they're talking over you, you might feel triggered by that. You might snap, or you have an outburst, such as shouting at them for not listening. It particularly happens with experiences that have happened time and again, like with family, those kinds of things. And then afterwards, you may have felt like, gosh, did I overreact? Or you may blame and say, no, I didn't overreact, but you may have felt, oh gosh, maybe my reaction was too much. And you think like, what was I thinking? Well, you may not have been thinking at all. And that is actually what happens when an amygdala hijack happens. Your emotions take over. Another way of thinking about it is something that Dr. Dan Siegel came up with, which he's a neuroscientist, I think is super helpful visual. So if we think about this, this is your brain stem here. When you see the front of my fingers here, this is your prefrontal cortex. And this is responsible for the planning, the executive function of your brain. Decision-making, problem-solving, self-control, all of the good stuff that we use millions of times a day. And this is all this part of your brain here, the prefrontal cortex. This part, my thumb, is the limbic system. And this is the part of the brain that's our behavioral and emotional responses, especially when it comes to those behaviors that we need for survival. Feeding, reproduction, caring for our young, if we think about that from like thousands of years ago to today, and our fight and flight responses. So when we're not triggered, our brain, we're going along normally. Our brainstem, our prefrontal cortex, we have access to all of that. But when we're triggered, we can flip our lid. And when we flip our lid, what we're exposing is the limbic system, our emotional response, and we no longer have access to this prefrontal cortex, that executive function of our brain. So our goal is to try to retain the executive function. And we can do that in any number of ways. So let's say we're triggered. We can, and we know that we flipped our lid, or we can feel it. We may not have expressed it, but we can feel it. We can sense the uncomfortableness in our stomach or whatever is happening in our body or emotionally. And in order to get this back and get control once again of our prefrontal cortex, we can go ask for a few minutes, we can take a walk in nature, we can talk to a friend, we can do a number of things that help us retain this. There's a great app on iPhone, I'm not sure if it's on the Android, it's called Breathe, and it's just a way of 4 breaths in, 4 breaths out, 4 breaths in, 4 breaths out, as a way to pull back your prefrontal cortex. And our goal is to really integrate our emotions and being able to be more curious, bring that kind of curiosity back, and this creativity and collaboration that comes when we have our prefrontal cortex available to us. So we can practice. So when we think about a difficult conversation, what is getting in our way? So think about a conversation that you're having or need to have that feels risky. And it could be in your personal or professional life. What is getting in your way of having that conversation? Is it a sense of retaliation, of being disliked, of rejection, of not wanting to hear what the other person has to say, being talked about, or you simply just don't know how to start the conversation? It could be a number of things that are getting in your way, and getting in touch with what that is important, so you know what is stopping you, so then you can work with that. Brene Brown has a great quote that I like. What stands in the way becomes the way. And we know that when we allow things to stay, they become habit. And the results of not having a courageous conversation can become a habit. We can form that habit. It can be deeply felt, and it's getting in the way of having honest and productive feedback. So the response is that we get resentful, trust is reduced, we get stuck in a blame loop, our curiosity ceases, and we can be focused on being right. And our own comfort wins out, and trust is eroded, moving us away from meaningful and lasting change and meaningful and lasting relationships. So one way of thinking about courageous conversations is the word, where the word courage is even derived from, which is cur. And this means heart. And so at the center of courage is leading with heart. And I think it offers an excellent way of thinking about courageous conversations. If we move forward with heart, a deep curiosity of really wanting to understand how others are perceiving a situation that may be different from how we're seeing it, we open ourselves up in new and authentic ways. So what is a courageous conversation? So here's how we define it. A discussion that can feel uncomfortable, but aims to openly and respectfully share in a way that benefits the relationship. Blame is laid aside, and blame is not your purpose. It's about speaking the truth, being transparent, vulnerable, and curious. And I think that's a beautiful way of thinking around what is a courageous conversation. And when you couple that with what does courage mean, which is really starting from the heart. There's another quote that I like from Fierce Conversations, which is one of the famous books on having difficult conversations. There's also Crucial Conversations, but I like this quote from Fierce Conversations. There's something within us that responds to those who level with us. And you know that you may have a feeling that somebody is saying something, but they're not really saying it. They want to say something, they're not. When people level with us, we usually are appreciative of it, even if we don't like hearing what is said. If it's said with compassion and with heart, we appreciate that people have leveled it with us. So I'd like to offer the 8 steps to having a courageous conversation. So if you're at the website, you can go ahead and download that conversation or that worksheet, and then we can go through that together. It's a great way to practice after this webinar. So the first step is to ask permission to have a conversation with that person. So I was recently speaking to a leader who wanted to deliver difficult feedback. He was going to dive right in. And when he did that, I could feel that it would be jolting. And even if you're the boss, which he was the chief executive, asking for permission creates safety and it shows respect. Perhaps the person isn't ready for the conversation. And people place a high value on autonomy. And when we attempt to force them into a conversation, they can resist our attempts, even if the content of the conversation we want to have may be in their best interest. So let's say you were starting off, you're the boss, and you're starting off saying, I'd like to offer some constructive criticism, or I'd like to offer you feedback to a direct report without consent. You know, the person can handle it in a few ways. They can roll off their back, they may have little effect, or they can get defensive right away. But when the boss takes time to explain why they want to give the feedback or why the feedback will support a mutual purpose, the employee can then choose to listen and be more likely to reflect on what is said. So asking for permission shows respect and creates some trust. Now, let's say the person did something illegal, or it's something like embezzlement, or it's something terrible that the person has done, or they're in a dangerous situation. And you really you can't take the time, or it's not appropriate to say, may we have a conversation? So in that case, you needed to obviously talk to the person, but you can still create some safety by, showing respect in terms of flexibility about either when or where the conversation is held. So let's say you have to have a conversation right now, right here, for moral, ethical, legal reasons. Even in this situation, you can create some sense of security. You can explain you need to have a conversation before you just dive in, invite them to a private space. You can even say, listen, sorry, I put you in this is an urgent issue, or that we have to have this conversation now. Let's go to a private space. Just to show respect to that person. Just these small adjustments in how you launch into a crucial conversation can help dampen any defensiveness and improve the conversation in general. Another way I like to think about the timing of a conversation is the right conversation at the wrong time is the wrong conversation. So you may feel the need to have this, but if the mood space isn't there and the person isn't in a place where he or she can hear it, then it's not the right conversation. So create the time and the space so the conversation is a meaningful one. Step 2 is to share the recordable facts, not your judgment, not your assessment, but this is what a movie camera would show. And just think about it as you roll through it in the situation in your head. What would a video camera see if it was recording the situation you want to speak to the person about? So if I use the example that I cited earlier from the leader that just wanted to dive in to have this conversation with their employee, he had a couple of things going on for him. So one is in meetings, he wanted to call out that she rolls her eyes when an idea is offered. He hears no whenever an idea is offered. That's her automatic response. And then also that information is held by her and not shared by others. She likes to control the information. So if he was to deliver this feedback, he would say something like, in our meetings, I noticed you roll your eyes when I offer an idea, or I hear no whenever I offer an idea, or information is held by one person. Now, again, these are recordable facts that a video camera would see. These are not open to interpretation. The rolling of the eyes could be captured on a video camera. So the next step then is to share your story, feelings, and responsibility. So a story I have in my head about that when you roll your eyes is that I think you're discounting me, or you feel you know better, or you don't want to be bothered. And that's a story that I'm making up about that. And my feeling is that I'm frustrated, or whatever your emotion is around that, angry, sad, whatever the emotion would be. Then you were saying, well, what is your responsibility here? So how, or saying something to the effect of, my responsibility here is that I may not be preparing well, and I'm dropping ideas in your lap in a meeting. And for that, I'm sorry if I'm contributing to this reaction in any way. I will be more aware so you're not being caught off guard in meetings. So it's really important here that we use I statements. This is what it's doing for you. So that's step 3. Step 4 is tying it to impact. Why is this important? And clarity about why it's important and what's at stake helps serve as grease, so to speak, for this conversation. So how this is important is because we want people to open up, and rolling eyes is shutting people down. We're working on generating new ideas, and the impact on the team of seeing your eyes roll is significant. To use another example, if you were to speak to the other issue, when you're holding information and you're the only one who has this information, it puts the organization at risk. If you leave or if something happens and we're not able to access the information, where the organization is at risk. So that is tying it to impact. So step 5 is, what do you want to happen next? So this is not a demand or entitlement, but a way of getting clear about what you would like to see. So using the same example is, I want to create a system where multiple people have access to information should it be required when you're on vacation or away from the office. Otherwise, I will always come to you first. If it's about eye rolling, I say, what I want to have happen is to have some awareness that your physical reaction is creating a reaction in others, including me. And I create a story about what's happening when you roll your eyes. So I would like to see a shift and not see that happen in our meetings. So after you've shared all of that, then you stop and you listen, and you'd like to hear the other person's perspective and invite your partner to respond. Now here we want to think about our own self-management, and we think about the brain and the hand. We want to hold on to our executive function and lead from the heart and from a place of curiosity. So if you're starting to feel this, just calmly breathe and just remember this little image of your brain in the hand, and you want to keep this. You don't want to interrupt. If the person lashes out or is yelling, you can ask inappropriate, let's have another conversation another time. Just retain. Don't let your limbic system rule the day. Hold on to your executive function, coming from a place with heart. So not losing touch with the heart piece of courageous conversations. So you can still show compassion. So the next is moving to shared understanding and next steps, and getting specific about who, when, and what success looks like. So for eye rolling, for example, so when we're in the meeting and I see you roll your eyes, how can we kind of catch that in the moment? Is there a signal? Is there something you'd like me to do that's not calling you out in front of other people, but is there a secret hand signal? Is there something else? Like, what would be helpful? Because the person may not even be aware that they're doing it. It's so automatic that they just have to start catching themselves. And so you're offering to help them. So for the information sharing example, it's, can we get someone trained in the next 2 weeks? Or can you show us where on the shared drive this is located? What does success look like specifically? And you want to do and create a shared understanding and next steps together. Step 8 is choosing a date for follow-up and check-in. So how's it going? So if it's something simple, it's maybe 2 weeks. If it's something really hard, is it a month or after the next meeting and there's eye rolling or not eye rolling? Like, how did that go for you? How did that feel? And then having a conversation about that. Now, let's say someone else is giving you feedback. And you want to, again, hold on to your brain in the hand and your executive function. Doesn't mean you don't feel emotion ever, because you may flip your lid. And if you do flip your lid, then just how do you, take a moment to ask for a few minutes, can we have this conversation, and listen, and to have a conversation another time, just so you can just manage your own emotional response. So if you're being given feedback, here are some steps that you can take in acknowledging the feedback. So what I hear you saying is, and then just ask the other person, or just rephrase what the other person has said, and then ask them if that's correct. And if it's not correct, then you keep going until you get it, what they're saying, and they're acknowledging what they're saying, that you got it. And then asking, is there anything more? Or do you feel that you've shared all there is to share? Is there anything else that you would like to share about this? And give that person the room and space to say whatever it is they have to say. And then asking, is there a next step? If yes, who will do it and by when, and just getting some clarity there. And then when are we going to follow up? And then thanking the other person for their feedback, because giving this feedback to you is super difficult for them, even if, or especially if you're the boss. And so how do you hear this feedback so people want to give you input? Say thank you and share your appreciation for their feedback. So in the conference, we would have actually done this live, but since it's a webinar, I'm going to invite you to try it with a partner. I want you to think about a time, either current time or a past, and use the worksheet to walk through your conversation. What is it that you want to say? Or if you think about a past situation, what would you prefer to say? If you're thinking about a current situation that you need to address, what would you like to say? And use the worksheet to jot it all out. Buddy up with somebody and practice and ask the other person, how did that land for you? How was that for you? And then take turns and give the other person practice. And so as we start to become more comfortable, these 8 steps just kind of roll and you're able to do it without even thinking about them. If you're just practicing, and even if you're having a difficult conversation, have notes in front of you of the 8 steps. Just be able to refer to them. Nothing wrong with that at all. And usually people really appreciate if you're trying to be sensitive. People really recognize it and usually want to give people a benefit of the doubt. So let's say you've now had the conversation. A final step is to take time to reflect. What went well for you? What might you have done differently, or what might you do differently next time? And any other insights that come to mind as you practice and get better at having courageous conversations. So, of course, giving feedback can be hard and stressful, but you can build the muscle. It is possible. So I hope you go be courageous, practice, know that you're doing your best, you're leading with heart, and coming to conversations with heart and curiosity and vulnerability, you will get better and better at doing it. So I wish you well and hope the worksheet is helpful for you. And I thank you for taking the time. I'm seeing blinking on my screen. I'm hoping it's not going out for you, but this is my dog Moses, a Great Dane, and I adopted him from Wayside Waifs. So shout out to Wayside. Thanks so much, and hope everybody has a great time practicing and getting really great at courageous conversations.